I just want to start by reading a paragraph to you of your own book. It's
Great.
on page 192. It's the bottom of the page, and it's talking about Carmel, who's, I suppose, the main protagonist of the book. She leaned in close to him. This is that she's met somebody in England. We won't go into the detail. Pressing her nose into his clean, fragrant hair and neck, letting herself enjoy it once more. His name is Tom. And she says, "There's no secret, Tom," because he's asked her about secrets. There's no secret. She's from Ireland. He's English. There is no secret, Tom, or else there are hundreds of them. And none of them interesting enough for you. He's a journalist. The secret is that we're a family. We're just an ordinary family with ordinary unhappiness like yours. And that, I suppose, is an into suggesting what the word ordinary means, what the word secret means, what the word we means. And that what you do then is you dramatize that as you bring it from one country to another, you put it under certain pressures. But the idea begins with the notion that what happened in the past, what happened to the parents of Carmel, is the beginning of the story, that the story might seem like it's now, but it isn't. It began back there somewhere. That's
Yeah,
the
very
question.
much. That's a question. Yeah, completely. I think because I started, the idea of the book came from the present, as in the kind of inciting, salacious incident of this child being accused of killing or harming another child. And then the work for me really was increasingly going back and thinking about how certain things could have come to be, and the kinds of people in the past who might have played a hand in leading to this circumstance, which is so ostensibly striking and dramatic and singular, and how actually contextualized it might be within this family's past.
I felt there was a softness came into your spirit as the book went on, and that in dramatizing the life of Carmel, you had to give her more and more complexity. You had to make her someone who really could have been anything, and that the reader then becomes immensely attached to her, to seeing how she's going to do.
That's good to hear. Yeah. I think her character, I guess, wasn't very definite in my head when I began. And actually what kind of built her up into who she becomes was this feeling of trying to figure out how a young woman could be so alienated from her child. So I didn't start out with the idea of Carmel's unwanted pregnancy and everything that takes place in that situation. It wasn't. A couple of people have asked me, like, was that an issue I wanted to include? Like, did I want to address the issue of unwanted pregnancy or abortion? And it wasn't like on my list of things to include at all. But it kind of came up organically because when I was doing some reading about children who are capable of serious acts of violence, more or less universally in common, they have some crucial figure in their early life who's not able to relate to them, or who's not able to care for them or connect with them in the usual and, hopefully ordinary way that parents can. And then I started to think about why that might be. So different reasons why this woman might not be able to care for a child. And then I kind of began to work backwards and think about the reality of unwanted pregnancy and how that might play out if one does have the child, and the sort of alienation and separation that might result from that being the beginning of the mother-child relationship.
What really made me sit up, what really made me think, whoever Megan Nolan is, she has these few pages are letting us know that for the next, I don't know how many decades, you are going to tease out these very difficult questions about character in ways that are public and private, in sentences that are very, very clear and also very ambiguous. In other words, that you have her pregnant, she's young, she's defenseless. We realize the year, I think it's 1979, because it's a mention of Mountbatten. And what you do is you very carefully don't make this into a public Irish issue. It is not about a woman's right to choose. It is not about the abortion referendum. It is not about those big questions. It is about a lonely girl, someone of immense intelligence in this town who can tell no one that she's pregnant. And what you do then is you start to work with the most private things, with her body, with her finding information in the worst possible places and then seeing if she could act on that information. You do that with immense, I suppose, sympathy. In other words, it's not as though you're angry on her behalf. The reader just feels the immense drama, the immense, how is this going to work for her? And I suppose what I'm interested in is I felt there was a novelist at work, meaning that you were somehow interested in the character, in the small moments, in the detail, and the large public question, which became in Ireland, of the women's right to choose who controls women's bodies, the constitution. You left that to itself because it's the novel job not to invoke these things, but actually it becomes quite public. It becomes, surely this is wrong. And
Totally.
I suppose the question is, how tempted were you to make it more public? How tempted were you to write it even more graphically? How I'm asking you about your own particular tact as a novelist.
Yeah, I think not because I don't want to or find it uninteresting. I don't think I'm particularly well suited to addressing broad social issues in a certain intellectual way. Like it's not my forte. I'm not particularly skilled at that, and I wouldn't feel comfortable trying to do that either in a novel or, frankly, in nonfiction either, about most things, including abortion. And I think the part of like what I've kind of come to terms with about myself as a writer, the longer you do it, the more you're understanding what you're not so strong at, what you are strong at, and trying to address either one of those. Is that I am able to. I am able to access people if I break the things down very minutely into physical experiences. Like, I don't think I would be able to write a novel about the issue of abortion, but I am able to write about, as you say, this woman's loneliness, experiencing the physicality of what she's going through in those moments. And I think that was the only way I could really approach it, was to really minutely, like, I was thinking about this today. I used to write poetry when I was a teenager and into my early adult years. And like one time someone who was interested in poetry asked me, like, what are you doing? Like, how do you begin to write a poem? Like, what are you thinking about? And I thought what I'm doing really is like closing my eyes and really strongly imagining like the physical feelings of things and trying to describe them accurately. And I think that's still basically what I'm doing with the novel sometimes, is trying to really break it down into moments of physicality and imagining them. And I think with Carmel, that was what I had to do to get into that experience, rather than drawing it from an external social issue perspective. I kind of wanted to get into this feeling of, because it is just total loneliness that she's experiencing, of the loneliness of having this huge secret, but also the kind of physical loneliness of having something wrong in your body and not knowing how to address it or how to even verbalize it. So I think that for my relationship to her, I became a lot closer with her when I wrote those scenes of her physical panic and her just wish to escape her body in those moments, was how I kind of got, as you say, like I kind of softened throughout the book. And when I thought of her in the first instance, she was very much a cold, defensive person. And then I think through those physical moments of panic, I kind of got closer to her and felt softer towards her.
I think all of us who come from, I suppose, country towns, if you'd excuse me calling Waterford a country town.
No, that's okay. I mean, as they'll say, it's technically a city, because it's got a cathedral.
I really do understand Waterford is a city, but I mean, let's say the provinces. That when you're 16 and 17, the big question is, who's going to Dublin? Who's going to disappear at the end of the summer in September after the Leaving Cert and disappear to Dublin, or go to college in Galway, or and who's not? And that creates, I think, in your novel, a big moment in the novel where, it isn't as though Derek is to blame, despite the fact that he is to blame. But you're very careful in making clear that he has all the freedom. And you see him later on in the book, and he still has all the freedom. He's the freedom to be polite, to be distant, to be everything he wants to be. And poor Carmel, I'm not saying poor Carmel, I didn't say poor Carmel, but Carmel doesn't have those chances. And it all hinges on that summer.
Yeah, and I think that's something I'm really interested in this novel and in general, is the sort of economy of second chances that people get, financially and socially and emotionally. Like, certain people have a resource of not limitless, but quite a number of second chances. And I think money does have something to do with that. And you can see that play out in the book a little bit, that there's, economic realities to do with the pregnancy and what happens in their lives afterwards. But also emotionally, she doesn't really have the resources to reimagine her life after this disaster as she sees it takes place. And I think that, you know, Derek naturally has a sort of resource of second chances that he doesn't even know about in this case.
Yeah.
But also she's sort of, you know, she's grown up in this family which has very barren emotional resources. And she doesn't have a lot to fall back on. You know, she has Rose, who's her, you know, kind of a saving grace. Her mother is an open and loving person, but the overall sort of atmosphere of the household she's grown up in is extremely limited. And I think that's another thing that causes people not to have the access to second chances that some people do, who grew up with a slightly more fluid emotional language. I don't think she had the ability to kind of accept this failure as she sees it. I'm not describing pregnancy as a failure, but, you know, she feels this is sort of a characteristic failure that now has to dictate the continuous failure of the rest of her life. And I do think that's somewhat partly to do with this family who have no ability to verbalize the idea of failure, or that they have been failing, or that they have had their, you know, have had these disappointments, these grave ongoing disappointments that are so obviously there, but they're not verbalizing. And I think that's partly why she doesn't have the ability to reimagine and to try it in a different way.
I suppose in a way, if she does have a second chance in the book, it is that her heart doesn't harden. You know and that there is an ability to go home. And I know home is not ideal, but she is willing to say there is one other place we could go now, and that's back, and that it'll be different when we go back. So there is a sense of her taking, I suppose, fate and trying to do something with it, even if it isn't. You know, she's not going to win the lottery or someone rich, but she's going to find that actually the place to go is home.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting, like, ironic moment in her life, is that, you know, as a teenager who had these dreams or plans or like ideas of herself as a certain kind of person, the idea of ending up in Waterford again indefinitely would have seemed nightmarish and like a failure. And then, in fact, as it turns out, it's what redeems them in the end, is that they do happen to have a place that is home still, despite everything that's happened. And that's something I think about quite a lot. Having left Waterford, I think it's 15 years ago, or a little bit more than that now. 18 years ago, maybe.
Where did you go then?
I went to Dublin first for 6 years, and then London for 9, almost 10 years, and now I'm here.
There's a paragraph. I always think that, you know, the paragraphs at the end of a section, pay attention. And sometimes there's nothing to pay attention to, and that silence is even something. But here, at the end of one of the sections, you talk about Rose, who's, I suppose, Lucy's grandmother, who's Carmel's mother, and she's in London. And what she's got news from home is about her family grave, the graves of her parents. So it's not about anyone dying. It's not bad news, but none of it sort of chills her. And it's an interesting moment where we see that funny Irish connection, not just to home, but to the past, to the dead, to a sense of belonging and heritage. And it reads, Rose felt foolish alongside her rage. How could she tell her living child, mother of her living grandchild, that she had been forced to forsake 2 graves for her? And in this moment regretted it. But it was real, the confluence of abandonment and failed duty. That's a lovely confluence of abandonment and failed duty. In other words, she has failed to look after the graves. The thought of the overgrown space, which was all that remained of her parents, sickened and lowered her, strongly compelled her to return. They had left her, and now she had left them. That place was her home. She had no home now, and she suspected that no one would ever apologize to her for this loss. And I mean, you know, people might think, looking at you, that you're a young novelist, but no one young could write this.
Yeah, I think I've sort of by nature I'm a very sort of sentimental and maudlin person anyway, and that I think
sorry, I'm going to stop you, because this is not sentiment. It's not maudlin. It's very direct, and it's an insight that a lot of Irish people who have lived in London or lived elsewhere will recognize immediately. In other words, it's a piercing. Instead of calling it maudlin, let's call it a piercing insight.
Thank you. That sounds better. Yeah. And yeah, I do think like all my family are still in Ireland, and most of them have never left for longer than a couple of months or a year, you know, so I am the outlier in that regard. And And I do like not in any horrible way, but it is kind of constantly anticipating things that you might, well, things that you are constantly losing out on by not being there for ordinary things, but also anticipating future loss. You know, it's constantly negotiating these two things with the desire to not actually live there at this moment. And I do think like my dad would be very fastidious about the care of his father's grave, for instance, and we would always go there when I'm home. And it's something that's again, not, I don't mean this in a horribly morbid way, but it is kind of in the back of my mind when I think about home or the next couple of decades being away from home.
There's another interesting detail which goes back not just to parents or grandparents, but great grandparents, is when they're talking about how John, who's Carmel's father, and it's how he eats. No, sorry, it's how Rose eats. That she eats isn't. Yeah, sorry. Rose is the one who eats quickly.
No, so John does, and Rose kind of eats at a leisurely pace, and John is the one who kind of needs to scrape it off.
Looking at the page here. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
So he's the one who eats too quickly, and he was, again, from provincial Ireland. We'll have someone in our ancestors who just simply ate the food and left the table, or had no patience with all this sitting around the table.
Yeah.
And you just have there's a single thing which I don't know, standing up at her plate and losing patience with the conversation. When your Granny June, Daddy's mother, was still alive, she used to do it the same way. In other words, it goes back to John's mother, probably something she picked up in the poorhouse and handed down. And you sort of shiver because she probably wasn't actually in the poorhouse, but it's just given in as a sort of an idea of the past, the poverty-stricken past, that she learned food was just something you ate. The idea of sitting around afterwards was not the luxury anyone could have. But it's a chilling little detail because it gives you then back into the generations a sense of deprivation. And it's a detail. It's not a big sweeping observation. It's a novel as a detail.
Totally, yeah. And I think that is something that in my own family and elsewhere, it is a habitual detail that I've heard is, in those institutions, that you would be eating and clearing it within a couple of minutes of being served, and that kind of habitual way of eating did continue to be passed down a little bit. And this idea of as you say, like not just within the institution, but also in a big family, if they don't have a lot of money, the idea, it's not pleasurable. It's not sitting around to enjoy a meal together. It's necessity, and it's rushed, and it's a different kind of dynamic. And I do think funny coming home sometimes where I often say to my friends here and in London, like my parents and especially my grandmother would probably think I was psychotic if they knew the amount of money or time that I spend in restaurants. That would just be a totally foreign concept to them. And that's just my leisure time. That's what I do for pleasure, and it's not something that I have in common with most people in my family. They think it's very, not that they think it's a bad thing to do, but it's quite alien to some people that I know to spend that sort of resource on eating is ridiculous to them because it's just a different thing for them. And yeah, I liked including that. I liked thinking about these sort of, quite physical automatic habits that get passed down. And that is one that I actually did inherit from my dad. And I had to grow out of it, of this thing of finish your dinner and get it into the bin and get the plate cleaned, and everything's done within 3 minutes. And I had to sort of teach myself to relax a bit when I got older, because that was just it was a different way that we engaged with stuff back then when I was a kid. And now I think my dad could sit down and enjoy a leisurely meal, but it's a different mindset for sure.
Did you find that living in London was essential for your formation as a novelist?
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about that today. I actually don't know if I would have written a novel if I was still in Ireland. And I'm sure I would have eventually, but I do think it would have taken me a lot longer. And that's partially just because I didn't have a career or a community as a writer in Ireland. I had started to write already before I left, but I didn't have much confidence or gathering around it. I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. I didn't know many other people who were doing it. And then in London, and I was afraid to do it, it seemed like a very big, forbidding idea. Like it seemed something for other people who were more educated and more hardworking and more diligent than I felt I was. And then in London, it just felt like I could kind of give it a go and it wouldn't matter because nobody knew me there. And it wouldn't matter so much if I failed or if I didn't manage to finish it. It didn't seem like such a big it didn't seem like such a big declaration that I would have to change my identity to say, okay, I'm a novelist now. It just felt like something I could try and play around with a little bit more than I felt able to in Ireland.
I suppose I'm wondering if it gave you one more thing, which is that at the very opening of the book, we see this family in London. They have almost fled to London. And unusually, they've all come. In other words, that's Carmel, her brother has come, and her parents have come. And the daughter and the granddaughter is Lucy, who's the kid who's being sort of accused, as it were, of. And they look like a social worker's dream. It's very clear. They come from Ireland. There's a lot of drinking on the men, and the women are sort of, I suppose, nervous, and let's say parenting has not been great. So they could look from a social worker's point of view as this Irish family who've made their way here, who are an enormous problem. And then what you begin to do is move the lens slowly, without really the reader noticing at what point you do it, into the interior of these characters, where you live in them, including the father, John, Richie, the brother, Rose, and Carmel herself, with immense sympathy and care. You don't lose the drinking, you don't lose the sort of frozenness that's in Carmel somewhere. But with Rose, you give her an enormous amount of care, as if you're painting her, you would capture something in her eyes. And you do with the others, just move the lens. And it's not just moving from the cold social worker lens. It's as though you are slowly bringing them back to Ireland. You're making them from a particular place, from a particular context, and giving them a sort of life that they themselves would see, but that certainly no one in London would see. But part of the pleasure of London is that people just don't see your Irish detail. But nonetheless, you're aware sometimes, certainly any foreign country, but London more than anywhere, they don't know anything about. And yet if I was at home in Ireland, they'd know what grave so-and-so is in, or what house, or what school, or what things happened that summer. So that you're moving as a novelist might, as though the job of a novelist is to move the characters from a London that is cold and that has everybody pinpointed, or everyone is anonymous, perhaps even, back to an Ireland where things are much softer in the way people are viewed. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of moving from London to Ireland, but yeah, you're completely correct. I think the way I probably imagined it when I was beginning was sort of to take these, so like the neighbors and the media who are looking at these people from a remove and they're stratifying and categorizing them in a certain very glib way. And then, I guess I thought of the novel as slowly moving into their actual interiority and their actuality. But that's really interesting what you say about moving from England to Ireland. I think that's really, really accurate, because I do think obviously it's very freeing in a way to be somewhere that's anonymous and nobody cares what you're doing. But it's very isolating, or I found it that way for at least 5 or 6 years after I moved there, to feel totally unknown, but also, like any category that I could have been in felt uncomfortable and wrong. And I didn't feel specific for a long time there. And I do think there's like the thing of what you're saying about knowing X, Y, and Z grave and you're one up the street and, all the context, it is a bit suffocating at times, but it's also really comforting. And like, I found myself going back more and more to Waterford and really craving that feeling of just seeing people that I know all the time when I go outside. Like that size of a place is very appealing to me, like more and more the older I get and the further away I get from it. And I think the characters in the book, obviously, like, they come to London and they're suddenly very one-dimensional in everyone else's eyes.
Tom is a creep.
Yes.
Tom's a creep.
Tom, he's based on. I mean, he's totally fictional, because I never worked as a staff member on a newspaper, but I was in and out of newspaper offices for about 5 or 6 years, just doing shifts here and there. And I shared an office with the Daily Mail once, and there was a really sweet.
Did you really?
Yeah. I was in the Metro, and the Metro are owned by the same people, so we were in the same building in Kensington, and we had this sort of all staff training day once. And there was a very sweet young boy. I was about 26 or 7, and he was much younger. He was about 19 or 20. And he was on a placement for his journalism course, but he was from the provinces, and he was very green seeming. He'd never been to London before. And he just seemed so enthusiastic and eager. And I just felt this kind of sinking feeling of like, oh God, what's he going to turn into now that he's going into the Daily Mail? You know, is he going to become something darker than he is now? Or is he going to get fired because he won't do the dark stuff? And I just had this imagining of how a kind of enthusiastic, ambitious young person could evolve into the sort of, you know, into the characters that we're all familiar with from the tabloid press, who are kind of, you know, malevolent and very vulture-like. And I kind of, I enjoyed to kind of tease out how someone who started out very sweet and green might turn that way.
This is another paragraph, and it's what I'm interested in here is that you need to give Carmel an interior life, and you can't really give it to her. You know, or you could have her reading the Brontes, or reading Sylvia Plath, or reading Edna O'Brien. You could have it done through her reading, but what you do it in a way is through her ways of seeing the world. This is her. This is about not telling people things. Nobody questioned these things, and there was no reason for them to. Sometimes the lies made her feel even lonelier than usual when she got into bed at the end of them. This is about her having an affair, you know, and that nobody knows what she's doing with this Derek. And so she gets into bed, pressing herself up against the cool wallpaper and failing to feel her body as anything material. It was lost in the darkness of her home, as it always was, and the hours were lost to history. If Derek died, she would be the only one who knew about them. Thinking this made tears spring to her eyes. She had to think back to every part of him to make her body less lonely and more purposeful. How red his mouth got, much redder than hers, after they kissed for a long time. I suppose what I'm thinking about here is that you are giving her the sort of sensuous life that a novelist has to have in the novelist's imagination. And you're giving her without lessening. What you're really careful to do with her, I think, is not to lessen her. Just because she gets pregnant as a teenager, just because she doesn't have a proper job, just because she isn't a great mother, just because of all the things that happened to her, you're really careful not to allow these things to lessen her or give her a less sensuous life or a less, I suppose, detailed or rich way of noticing. And this is a really important, I think, part of the novel that is almost political, or almost gives it a sort of public, moves it into the public realm. Don't think you can judge her or know her just because of a set of details about her.
Absolutely. I think one of the things I find most troubling and kind of distasteful about a certain criticism of a certain kind of novel or creative work about working class people is the idea that it's ridiculous that they might have a complex interior life and they might have a complex perspective on things. Sometimes if you write these, a couple of people referred to the fact that each member of my family in this book, the Greens, they all have quite, they're not intellectualizing necessarily, but they all have complex perspectives on their own lives. And certain comments kind of suggested that this was unrealistic, that each member of the family would have like a complex reality for themselves. And I think that is a kind of, elitist criticism of people who are not supposed to be intellectual, that they don't have any particular interior life. And I think it's a real failing, not just about books, but in general in society, that it's very easy to walk around imagining everyone you pass by is not as wonderfully complicated as you are, and to assume that others are much more are much more basic and unsophisticated in certain emotional senses than you are. And that's definitely one thing I actively wanted to do with the novel, was to suggest that that's not the case, and that you should kind of assume that most people do have a sophisticated inside life.
I suppose the word working class is the key word here. That these are hard words to use in Ireland to suggest that there is such a thing as a working class person. And therefore you could define, and that will define a person in many ways. And everybody knows about this, because you could have a working class family in which now one member has a PhD and the other member is working in Boston in construction. That it's not as though everything works in Ireland according to a system of class.
Yeah.
And therefore, she goes as far as the leaving cert. If that summer had been different, she could have become anything. And all of us have lived with that all our lives, that you notice someone in school with you, and you realize slowly that they're from a really poor background, but they get A's and B's, and someone then, that it just isn't easy in Ireland, I think, in an Irish town to say that. But there's something else struck me. And just as something I really don't know, which is all of us think about that last summer of school, of, what they call in America, of just doing the Leaving Cert, and how different something might have been if you had done something else. If I had decided to become a national teacher, or if I decided to go into the civil service, what would it have been like? But it struck me, of course, that if you're a woman, that it's a different what might it have been like. What if I had got pregnant that summer? And that has to be in every woman's imagination, that was a possibility, if not that summer, the one before or the one after, and that would have changed my life. And if you're a novelist, then we're always involved in trying to find ways of expressing our dreaming, our imagining, our what ifs. That this is actually a really important subject for a woman novelist.
Yeah.
In a way that for a guy, it just doesn't have the same resonance.
I think it seemed like when I grew up now, in a certain way, feels like for that exact reason, like a lot of my teenage girlhood was characterized by a kind of communal terror of pregnancy in school. It was like even to quite a childish degree where people, like the girls I went to school with, they weren't all having sex at that point, but it was still somehow a very present, constant conversational topic and terror that kind of just ambiently existed. And I wonder if now that things are different after 2018, if that's still the same feeling that might exist among teenage girls. I don't know, but I definitely think that's completely accurate. I think that this idea of, there, but for the grace of God, go I, about, these kind of a few characters in school that did get pregnant, they'd be kind of spoken of as the kind of ghost story that you have to avoid to get on the right path. And it did have this huge resonance. And I think Carmel's outcome, as you say, I think definitely in my writing and in a lot of people's writing, they exercise certain feared outcomes that they have either imagined for themselves or have taken place, or they've witnessed in others. And I think Carmel's definitely that for me, is this idea of what if you actually didn't get to continue? What if I didn't get to go to London or New York or wherever I've gone? And I think I do recognize in myself that I would have been very selfishly furious if I was stopped from doing any of the kind of half thought out plans that I got to do. And I feel for her because of that.
I think you have an artistic problem with the book, where how do you then release these characters from, for example, this is their fate, and they're now just gone home, and they're going to lead hard lives at home. And what's wonderful about the book is the way you effortlessly lift the thing. You release them, you let energy in. It isn't as though, as I said, it isn't as though they become happy. But there's a wonderful moment about Carmen. Says her instinct was to say everything, no matter what it was. This is, towards the end of the book, to leave no possible opening for the sort of secret keeping which had taken place, the kind that burrowed down into your stomach and changed who you were and made you sick. And then there's a beautiful, towards the end of the book, I'm not giving the plot away, I'm just giving a sense of the atmosphere that you insist that you want. This book is not merely, as it were, a mirror up to people facing their own destiny as hard, but soft thing. She knew now that it didn't work that way. She's talking about secrecy, that the things you did or failed to do could not be erased by anything, not even love. So you could end the novel there, just bring it down. No, it's all over. Not even love could do anything for these people. And then there's a beautiful sentence coming next, the next paragraph. It's just what? It's 2 words, a comma, and 2 words. And I think this is a piece of genius, because how do you get these 4 words? Where do they come from? And they're really great. They just go, but still, comma, they tried. And my feeling is that you got it effortlessly, that it just came and was on the page before you knew where you were, and you were smart enough to leave it there, and you followed it through. It's just, she knew, just go back again, she knew now that it didn't work that way, meaning that you can't erase things. You can't just say it didn't happen. That the things you did or failed to do could not be erased by anything, comma, not even love. This is a very bleak, and you need something, or in fact, just leave it like that. But I think when you go, but still, comma, they try. And then you go into detail there. Look, I need to know how you got, but still, comma, they tried.
Yeah, I think I had been thinking a lot about the John character, who I kind of knew would never be coming around in a particularly gung-ho, happy families way. But I kind of found it moving to think about someone of his age making the adjustments that he was able to make. Like the fact that he tried to have dinner with them and tried to sit down with them, and there was something about this idea of, I knew it was never going to have a especially sunny ending, but this idea of trying, I mean, it's kind of the only thing all of us are able to commit to doing. You can't really commit to, there's so many things that I wish I could say, oh, I'll never do that again, or I'm definitely going to do that every day of my life. And you just can't say, you can't guarantee any of those things, but you can guarantee trying, I suppose. And yeah, I think that was always in my mind, that they would end in this place where they're not resolved, but they're definitely in the process of trying.
But still, comma, they tried. That's great. Megan, we really want to thank you. This is, first of all, it's an insight into the way in which, Ireland and England operate in relation to each other. It's a contemporary novel, but it's a beautiful piece of writing because it's subtle, it's tactful, it's character-led, and it's beautifully written. And we want to thank you very much. I mean, I'm speaking, I think, on behalf of a lot of your readers. Just, this is a gem, and we're very grateful to you, Megan.
Thanks so much
for doing this.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Okay.